welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I explore my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon, and today my special guest for tasting video number 2 is Fred Yarm.
Hello.
Hi, Fred. So I have known Fred for many years, first indirectly through his blog, Cocktail Virgin Slut, and then later as a customer at bars that he was working on one side of, and I was sitting at the other being served some absolutely fabulous drinks with a side of fabulous conversation. So Fred, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a labor of love.
Absolutely. So that's part of why I wanted to invite you here, because you are known as a blogger and now as a bartender, but you've had a really eclectic path into the industry. So how did you navigate all of that? How did you get here?
Started with a previous career and just as a little hobby to start mixing drinks on our, to enjoy on our deck. And that started around June 2006, just one drink every week, became a little bit more. I was writing them up on a live journal. That got my friends involved and excited, and one of them started a blog in 2007, Cocktail Virgin. She was sort of losing steam. A couple months later, she invited 3 more of us on to write, and I became the Cocktail Virgin Slut at that point.
Yeah.
And it one person kind of wrote one post, the founder kind of drifted off. My wife stuck it out to around 2010, 2011, and been keeping going ever since.
And it is an amazing document. You make drinks at home, but you've also been kind of documenting these Boston drinks as you go out to restaurants. I've been with Fred when he's like, can I get the recipe for that? And jotting it down. And so you've documented the history for a very long time.
Right. It started as, just field notes and for my own edification. And then my day job took a pause, and a friend's mom told me that I should write a book, put it down. And that was around 2012 and early 2012. And then, I was already sitting on all of this. I found some people to give me advice on how to publish a book and got the book out. And then,
my book was written much the same way because I had a radio spot, and so I already had all the content. And then it's like, okay, now I take this and massage it into a book. So it's really nice to have that source material when you're starting.
And from there, the world sort of opened up. I started getting interviews, doing teaching classes. I taught a stir class with John Gertson. And finally, they got me behind a bar one night, an industry series at the Blue Room. It was originally 4 Mondays. They added a 5th later, but I was partnered with Katie Emerson, then of the Hawthorne, previously of Death and Company. And between her star power, my social media, we filled the room. We had a 9-drink menu. And I remember just saying to my wife, like, that was so much fun. I should do this for a living. And she said, yeah, you should. And I said,
that's awesome that she was so supportive. I'm going to jump to being a bartender, maybe not exactly what you expect.
I said it almost offhanded, and I said, like, how will it work out? She's like, we'll figure it out. Then I had to find someone crazy enough to hire me, someone with no restaurant experience, a lot of knowledge. And, Sam at Russell House hired me in 2013 and bar back for a few months, became a daytime bartender, and worked my way up and been working throughout Boston, Cambridge, Somerville area.
Awesome.
For the last 10 years.
So one of the reasons why I asked you specifically to taste this little bottle that we're going to taste, Mr. Boston Peppermint Schnapps, is because, in many ways I think of you as being Mr. Boston, right? You have been this really important figure in documenting first the Boston cocktail scene, and now, being a player in that scene really yourself from the other side. So what to you, what's your background with Mr. Boston, the brand? Were you familiar with it as a bartender?
I mean, it's always been on the shelf, usually the lower shelves.
Indeed.
Also, the brand started right after Prohibition ended. They bought an old distillery. This is the Berkowitz brothers, Ira and Irwin and Hyman, and they built it up in 1933. They saw a need in 1935 and started putting out the bartender guide. And that's been an old school bar people that's on everybody's shelf.
Right.
And that went until 2012. And, in Boston, if you drove down Mass Ave in the Roxbury area, 1010 Mass Ave is the location of that distillery where it ran from, under their guidance from 1933 to 1986. And now it's municipal building for Boston transportation, etc.
I thought about doing a field trip where we would go and taste the bottle in front of the old distillery, but I figured that probably wasn't the best idea.
In that neighborhood, discarding the empty nip bottle on the sidewalk would be perfectly fine.
Perfectly on brand.
Yeah, so it actually, the book continued after they had already sold the brand. The brand obviously transferred hands many times from 1986 until 2019 when it landed in Sazerac.
Right.
Company, and that's why a lot of Mr. Boston these days is not from Boston, but from Kentucky.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think, right. None of it, I think, is made in Boston anymore. But, you know, so many brands, none of it's made where it initially came from either. Well, so this one, I just, if you haven't watched the video about this yet, go back and watch last week when I talk about this bottle specifically and kind of dive into the brand story and tell the story of the Mr. Boston brand. But as best I can decipher, this bottle probably comes from the late 1980s. So there's a few clues to that. So one is it's a plastic bottle. So that means it's after 1981, which is when plastic bottles start getting used in the US. And then there's some things on the label about it being Mr. Boston, but you know, it doesn't have the old man. You remember the sort of like this is a Boston brand. They've really changed it over the years quite a bit. It's not old Mr. Boston anymore. It's just Mr. Boston. And then also one of the keys that kind of really pinpoints this is that it's 48 proof. It doesn't say alcohol by volume on it. And that changes in the US in 1986. They pass a law which goes into effect in 1988. So probably late 80s, before 1988 is going to be my guess on this one. What do you notice about it?
It's clear.
And? Half empty.
Yes.
I have not drunk any of this. That's the way it came.
Often it evaporates. I mean, definitely spirits collector Eric Witz will talk about how good of a seal it was.
Right. So what do you think has evaporated? Do you think it's the alcohol that's evaporated? Does the water evaporate too? Like, what are we going to get ourselves into when we crack this open? What can we expect?
It'll be probably more alcohol than water, but I mean, both will.
Okay, but both, more alcohol than water will have evaporated?
Just by boiling point evaporation.
Yeah, that's what I would assume too. Okay. Are you scared?
No. Do you want to talk about what schnapps mean, or do?
Sure. Do you want to taste it first? Let's taste it and then we'll talk about what schnapps mean. All right, let's do it. All right, you know, that's what people are here for, really. They're watching to see us open this. It's not dusty. This one's not dusty, but it is plastic. Do we think any of the plastic goes inside? Oh, here we go. See, definitely sealed. That was thoroughly sealed. All right.
I'm not going to worry about its plastic content.
Oh, it is thick. All right, let's save a little so we can have a second taste. Smells
like solvent.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it doesn't smell pepperminty to me.
That might have evaporated off too.
Exactly. I'm really surprised. Like, I expected to get this woof of toothpaste.
Oh, no, it's there though.
Yeah, okay, it's coming out now. The first thing I got is just what I think of as old liqueur smell. Have you tasted many vintage liqueurs?
A few, but usually they've held up, something someone's proud of.
Right. These, no idea on this one. Yeah, so if you smell really hard, you kind of get this mint, but it's almost kind of...
It's mint.
It's mint. All right, the toothpaste is there.
Minimal says it's like woody aroma, woody solventy aroma, then...
That's very minty.
Definitely scope.
Wow. Scope. Oh! I can't tell, like, the alcohol content past the mint.
It's even lower than mouthwash.
Well, and what's mouthwash usually? Do you know?
I don't know. Apparently from what I've seen on the subway in Central Square, good enough to drink.
Good enough to drink. So this starts at 48 proof, so that's 24% alcohol by volume, and so it's somewhere south of that now. All right. I mean, it doesn't taste bad, except that it tastes minty, right? Like
I'm just surprised that the aroma is gone. That is
really surprising. You know, and these glasses are pretty good for concentrating aroma. You would expect to get
kind of the hallmark of peppermint is it's going to hit you before you get there.
Not at all with this one.
So obviously they have some complexity in their peppermint oil.
I guess so. I think the label's really funny, right? Because if you kind of glance out of the corner of your eye, It does not look like peppermint. It looks like cannabis.
That was, you know, the 70s, possibly the 80s.
So they recommend serving it as a peppermint freeze. It says perfect for a peppermint freeze, which is peppermint schnapps on ice.
Sure, I mean, that's
It's really sophisticated 1980s cocktail.
it's pretty common for the North American schnapps. Sort of the word schnapps originates in Germany with sort of fermented fruit juice that then is distilled kind of in an eau de vie style.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Because when you read about schnapps, they're like, these are very, very
Elegant.
strong, alcoholic, elegant things, right?
They'll be clear.
Not at all here.
Also, you could tell the difference that the German schnapps have one P, as in North America, Canada, and the United States, they bastardize into two Ps.
Yeah.
They dropped the whole eau de vie aspect and went into fruit juice, flavors, spices, sugar, and alcohol. Not meant to be sipped like the German style, but more shot to get the experience over with, or savored. Or put into mixed drinks like the frap that you were describing.
Right, or, you know, I think for most Americans, when they think of schnapps, they think of peach schnapps, right? De Kuyper peach schnapps comes out in the 80s. I mean, this whole line of schnapps is probably really a response to De Kuyper, right?
You know, this has been going on for quite a while. I mean, probably in the 50s. That's the whole era of
Really? Okay.
the grasshopper, all those creamy drinks that had liqueurs. So,
but they would have been described as a creme de menthe, right? Like rather than a creme de cacao. So like that was the language used.
schnapps would be a lower level of sugar.
Okay, than the cremes, yeah.
Cremes are 300 grams per liter, unless you're creme de cassis, then it's 400 grams per liter. Whereas schnapps, you're not as regulated, so you just kind of want to hit that. It's slightly sweet, kills the burn. It's like Fireball, goes down nice.
Yeah, what's left is definitely not slightly sweet. I mean, this is sugary, right? If
Sugar's going nowhere.
Right, exactly. The water and the alcohol has evaporated off. The mint aroma has evaporated off. And what is left is like syrup.
It's probably twice as concentrated.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, it's definitely, we were talking before, and you're like, yeah, it won't be the worst thing I've ever tasted. It's definitely not the worst thing I've ever tasted.
No, I mean, could have brought me in for the Malort minis. That would have been a...
Although I have to say, Malort is actually not as bad as it used to be.
Right.
Have you had it recently
yes.
since CH took it over?
Got a little sweeter, a little less bitter.
Yeah. Now it's fine, which is kind of sad because a spirit that that is known for its badness, and you give it to somebody. I was in a bar in Chicago and I was sitting down, and there was a young guy, 20-something. I struck up a conversation with at the bar. It's his first time in Chicago. I said, "Oh, have you had Malort yet?" And he said, "Oh no, what's that?" And I had the bartender give him some, and he took a sip and he was like, "Oh, that's delicious." And I'm like, "What? It's Malort. That is not the answer I was looking for."
There's still Elixir Nova Salis if you want. Brutal.
That's true. That is a lot. That's an Amaro that you use in drop quantities, or or inflict upon people that you think I don't know. All right. Well, that was exciting. I actually have a bonus bottle for you.
Sure.
All right. So I'm going to set this aside. I don't want to get them mixed up because I don't think these two things are going to go together very well. So, schnapps. So far, I have opened a few bottles of schnapps, a couple few. But one of the very first bottles I opened in the very first reveal video, #1, was this one. So this is Hot Shot Tropical Fruit Schnapps. This is 42 proof, so a little bit less alcoholic, only 21% ABV. As best I can tell, this comes out in 1987, 1988 is when this brand hits the market. It is kind of connected to Mr. Boston. So they are both owned by the same company at the same time. Glenmore Distilling at some point buys Mr. Boston brand. They also buy Hot Shot. And when I actually go back, when I was researching this bottle, I didn't talk about it in the initial video, but when I was researching this bottle, what I actually found out was that the first ever reference to the words Hot Shot is from Mr. Boston. So it's like this was a product they maybe had in development. And then this is my guess, when Glenmore bought Mr. Boston, they got this Hot Shot name, idea, whatever, I don't know. But they didn't bother bottling it as a Mr. Boston thing. They just bottled it as its own thing. Have you ever heard of it?
I've heard of Hot Shots, yeah. I believe cinnamon kind of noted.
Right. So this was, I think later came up with different flavors of hot shot, but in the beginning there was only one. And it was hot shot tropical fruit schnapps. Like all those words went together. The other flavors are much farther, much later on, as far as I can tell. So also from the 80s. Also same thing where it only says 42 proof. So again, probably pre-1988. It's actually a pretty tight window because of when the purchase goes and where this is made. So it's probably 1987 or 1986 or 87, something like that. All right. Also sealed. By the way, $1.80 at the LCBO in Ontario. So made in the USA, purchased in Canada. All right. So it's got fruit on the label, so you know what to expect.
That kiwi is very prominent.
Just as thick as the last one. Kind of curious if I have some schnapps, American-style sweet schnapps that are in glass bottles, and what they will taste like when they haven't evaporated quite so much.
Smells like canned fruit salad with that solventy note.
But again, very, very faint on the aroma. And I think a lot of the volatiles are just going to have evaporated off with the alcohol.
I mean, these are from flavor houses. I mean, they're probably...
Didn't have any fruit in the first place?
Probably not.
Oh, that's... Okay, as I swish it around, you know, do a little wine swirl, I'm definitely getting some more vague fruit notes there. That's actually really tasty. I would totally drink that.
It starts out very soft, gentle, like these pear notes with a little bit of harshness towards the end, but...
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like peach schnapps, right? And again, like, I think this is totally square, like, marketing. It's that time period.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a soft spot for the fuzzy navel, although I've only had it once. It was the first thing that people got me drunk on, so...
Everybody's got their origin story. My first tasting video, we tasted amaretto. And I had asked my good friend Casey, bartender that I know, I was like, what do you want to taste? He's like, I want to taste amaretto. And I was like, why amaretto? And he was like, oh, it was the first alcohol I ever had, right?
It's a big starter alcohol, I think.
Yeah.
I drank that. Used to order that. It was really a means of frustration because it's half the strength of regular alcohol and, you know, tons of sugar.
Well, it's really funny because when you read about peach schnapps, and I'm sure this will come up because there's got to be a bottle of peach schnapps in these bins somewhere. When you read about peach schnapps, it really was this thing that was, it was so popular because it was so easy to drink. It was a time when Americans didn't like the taste of alcohol. And so there's a quote that says, you know, finally something something you don't have to get used to, like red wine. Like red wine was too challenging. Peach schnapps was easy to drink and you didn't have to get used to it. All right, well, I have to say not as bad as I feared it might be. Both of these.
They are, yeah, I think it just lost a lot of aromatics, but it turned out all right.
Right, and enough sugar to preserve it.
I think the sugar doubled at this point, so to make up for the alcohol that was lost.
All right, well, so the other reason, as I said before, one of the reasons why I invited you here is because I think of you as the modern day Mr. Boston in a way, because of how much you have publicized the Boston bar industry to the rest of the world. I mean, as one of the cocktail classes that I teach is my Drinking the Decades, and I talk about the early cocktail scene, the craft cocktail renaissance. I talk about New York, I talk about San Francisco, and I talk about London, which are three of the big cities where the scene was really coming up. But Boston actually had a really early start in the modern craft cocktail renaissance.
We date back to about 1998 with the opening of the B-side and a lot of the...
Right, so like that's before Milk and Honey in New York, which
sure, but it was,
would sort of mark as the beginning of the craft cocktail.
It was after Dale DeGroff started, so it's a lot of influences were crossing back and forth. Like John Gertson, who kind of spun off from that crew, did sit at the Bemelman's bar, and he knew about Dale DeGroff's recipes. So it was a lot of interplay. A lot of recipes were passed back and forth. Times I had him at Green Street, where probably only a year or two after. It wasn't websites. It was either email or phone conversations. So it was a lot of cross communication with New York. I think that was our closest siblings. I guess we were the little sibling of
little sibling of New York, but maybe the big one, because you were, I mean, you know, if you count Dale DeGraff as the beginning, then you're a little behind that. But so what do you think is kind of does Boston have a unique stamp? Does it have a style? Like, how would it have differentiated from New York in those time periods? What does Boston historically contribute to our modern craft cocktail renaissance?
You know, recipe wise, probably the best known would be the Ward 8, which is sort of a
That's
weird,
classic,
a
right?
weird.
That's the pre cocktail renaissance.
It was 1898, first published in 1922. Not a great drink in my book.
It's really not.
But, you know, there was Louis Mixed Drinks in 1904. They have a drink, the Marliave. The Marliave just closed, but it survived Prohibition. So there were definitely a few glimmers here and there. But, you know, Boston started up kind of spinning off of the spirit forwardness of New York, maybe not as intensely. Early adopters of Saint Germain, a lot of the classic Saint Germain recipes spawned from Misty, Coffin, and others. Starting around 2007, also early adopters around the same time of New York City as with Mezcal.
Yep. Also Misty, big Mezcal advocate, right?
Indeed, and she went on to work for Del Maguey, so you know, it all went hand in hand.
And what do you see about what would you say is like the Boston cocktail scene now, and kind of where do you see it going in the future?
I mean, it's a lot of influences. I mean, a recipe only needs to be a couple weeks old before it gets here. Definitely Mezcal's taken off, but it's a lot more of a, you know, the equal parts like the Naked and Famous as opposed to, you know, other styles of drinks. You know, sort of the daiquiri's always been a favorite, especially Boston being a rum city.
Right. So the DTO idea, is that a Boston thing? So DTO is daiquiri timeout. Where's that come from? I only know it from your blog, so I assume anything that's on your blog is a Boston thing.
I definitely rooted in for my second book. The new wave of the daiquiri timeout started as a Boston thing. The history of the daiquiri timeout predates sort of when the liquor reps kind of blossomed. They kind of were on Martha's Vineyard discussing the events on Kennebunkport and how the Kennedys loved the daiquiri and how if they just taken a moment and composed themselves with a nice daiquiri, maybe they didn't need to be drinking more that night. But still, it sort of spread with the love of the daiquiri, spread to different cities from Boston. The original term, you know, is found before that movement in the movie Swingers. So it
Which I have not seen.
It'll be all right, but it does exist in there as but it's about taking a moment, composing yourself, bonding. Sometimes it's before a drink. You just have a little share a daiquiri to look over the menu. Sometimes it's sending a daiquiri across town. They take all forms. So
excellent. Yeah, I've been gifted, you know, bartenders will call a daiquiri timeout at the bar and do shots of
little snackeries and
snackeries. That's right, snackeries.
Yeah, I mean it's just a really good way of just sort of gauging a bartenders by trying their daiquiri. You can kind of look into their soul of how they think about balance. A little bit more tart, a little bit more sweet, what you consider in the middle. Sort of what rum choice, how clean, how crisp, how funky, how grassy.
All right, you said I can look into the soul of a bartender with their daiquiri. So, Fred, I want to look into your soul. What's your kind of daiquiri spec?
You know, I do find that funky rums, the funk in like agricoles and Jamaican rum is sort of like the seasoning, like the salt and pepper of the, like bitters to an old fashioned. That really a nice clean white rum, locally privateer, but so many others. Pretty much like, you know, two half, maybe two
half.
With or 2 3/4, which is more of a New York spec. I'm not opposed to. That's a 1-to-1 simple syrup. Usually something like lighter, not maybe white or a cane, but not too dark. But I do like a bar spoon of Jamaican high ester, or a little bit of often I'll go for like a bar spoon of agricole just to get that grassiness.
So you're not using agricole as the base of it, but you're using it as I mean, sometimes, yes. Right?
While I will do that at places like Daiquiris and Daisies, they have that as an option. Most people don't care for agricole that greatly.
Right. I mean, I am a person, I love rum. I have a lot of rum. I'm deep on rum, but I I mostly don't like agricoles. But every once in a while, like a rum agricole daiquiri is exactly what I'm looking for. It is kind of the application. So I will have to try this seasoning.
Just a hint, you know, an eighth of an
Yeah.
ounce, a quarter of an ounce will bring out some complexity in, you know, sort of what's stripped away in a very clean white rum.
All right, well, maybe I will have you back sometime, Fred, to taste some white rum or something. If you could taste a bottle, so I mean, I asked, you know, last week, or not last week, but last tasting video, it was Casey. Casey, what did you want to taste? I just kind of inflicted Mr. Boston Peppermint Schnapps on you because of the Boston connection. But if there was some bottle you wanted to taste, a brand or a style, I mean, I have 300 to 400 of these little bottles. I'm gonna have to do a lot of these tasting videos. So if I come back to you, what do you want to taste?
You know, historically, we did travel to New Orleans and taste Steve Rumsberg's rum collection to try what old New England rum was like.
Yeah.
But old whiskey, yeah, sort of seeing what the classic spirits were like back in the day before.
Right, yeah. The oldest stuff I have is probably like the 60s to the 70s is sort of like the window. We think Grandma started collecting in the mid 70s, but I found a few bottles that I'm pretty sure are from the late 60s. So, all right, well, I will keep that in mind, and maybe you'll hear from me again. In the meantime, if people want to find you, where do they do that?
Oh, you know, Instagram is a great place at Frederick Yarm, Frederic, Yarm, Y-A-R-M, at the Cocktail Virgin blog, so that's cocktailvirgin.blogspot.com. I'm currently between bar gigs, so soon at a...
So follow him on one of those places, and then you'll be able to find out where he lands. And you too can sit across the bar and have Fred make you fascinating cocktails. And then he'll write about them on his blog, and you can see yourself there, and that's actually really fun too. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today, and thank you all for watching. So don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, share this video with all your friends, and tell them about the project. Thanks for watching. Cheers! Cheers!